An atheist masks his pain with alcohol and drugs.
When I died, I turned to dust, so why did anything that I do matter today anyway?
Until someone asks him a question he never considered.
That thought of not having to walk around with all of my transgressions, it reduced me to tears.
Plus, a near-fatal accident sent him to the gates of heaven. Find out who he met there. New York Times bestselling author Don Piper is here on today's 700 Club Interactive. Well, welcome to the show. Since 2009, the terrorist group Boko Haram has forced over 2.5 million people from their homes in Western Africa. In spite of the conflict, here's a story of triumph.
Well, just 2 years ago, the Adewumi family, who are devout Christians, escaped Boko Haram and gained asylum in New York, where they lived in a homeless shelter. That's when the then 6-year-old Tani began teaching himself chess to pass the time. In just over a year after learning the game, he won first place in the New York State tournament in the kindergarten through third grade division. After his story made its rounds in the press, someone started a GoFundMe page for this family. In just 10 days, nearly $250,000 was raised. Tani's father posted an update on the page, which reads, "To whom much is given, much is required. So we take our blessings and give them back to God and the world." The Adewumis have vowed to give 10% of the donations back to their church, and they've said they'll use it to benefit other African immigrants struggling to settle in the United States. Because of Tani's talent and the help of others, the family now has a home and stable jobs. How wonderful is that?
Wonderful that is. That is so wonderful.
Amazing.
And the whole dedication, I'm going to give back. Yes, God helped me out of poverty.
Others.
He provided for me. I'm going to help others. I'm going to provide for others. Yay.
The way it should be. Yeah.
Well, A.Z. Robertson is a typical 9th grade student in a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee. Recently, some of Ozzy's fellow classmates realized that the boy was just going through a tough time. That's when they decided to buy him some new shoes. Take a look.
Okay, something wrong.
We got you some stuff.
Because why?
Because of like how generous you are, everything you do, and everything.
Oh.
What? No.
Because of what?
It's not how nice he is and how good a person he is.
And how you always helping people, right?
And this is nothing. Like it's gonna help you way better in the long run, but like, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I apologize. Azzy. Wow.
I
This
bet.
is from your class.
Okay.
Don't cry.
This is nothing, as all the stuff you've done for everyone in this class. You deserve way more than this. Thank you. You're welcome. I really appreciate it. It'll make everybody start crying now. Oh, thank you guys. Oh. You're welcome.
Well, Ozzy was bullied, and that's the reason why they gave him those shoes, that he had a real tough time at school. And then the other students got together and said, yes, let's make a difference in his life.
Love that. Love the fact that they honored his kindness.
Yes,
Yeah.
and recognized it. Yeah. Well, DIPG is an aggressive tumor that forms in the brainstem and is the leading cause of pediatric brain tumors. Nationwide, between 200 to 400 children ages 4 to 11 are diagnosed annually. Only 10% of those with the condition live for 2 years after the diagnosis.
Well, 7-year-old Emma Martins of Heartland, Wisconsin, was diagnosed with DIPG in January. Emma loves dogs and was never able to have one because one of her family members has allergies. So Emma requested the next best thing, pictures of dogs. Since then, dog owners from all over the world have sent Emma pictures of their pooches. Emma was even able to meet her local police canine dogs, and the local animal shelter made her veterinarian of the day. Well, if you'd like to encourage Emma with a cute dog photo, I know dog owners like to show off their dogs, send them to her Facebook page. It's Emma Loves Dogs 7. She'd love to hear from more
way to
people,
go,
I'm
Emma.
sure.
Well, Purdue superfan Tyler Trent passed away earlier this year on January 1st, but his legacy lives on.
Last week, Purdue renamed the student entrance gate at Ross-Ade Stadium in Tyler's honor. He gained notoriety after being diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer. Tyler's positive attitude and his faith made him an inspiration, and he will be missed by those closest to him. Purdue coach Jeff Brome said, "Rest in peace to our team captain and our hero. God has put Tyler on his team. His courage, strength, and spirit touched a nation and inspired us all. We love you, Tyler." Wow, he'll be sorely missed.
He will be missed, but boy, did he ever touch a nation. And you see the courage of him facing death and saying, I'm still going to live. I'm still going to be out there. So, yay.
An apt tribute.
Yes.
Well, up next, a terrible accident left him clinically dead for 90 minutes. Find out who he met in heaven. New York Times bestselling author Don Piper is here to tell us all about it when we return. It's been 30 years since Don Piper was declared dead. It's also been 30 years since he came back to life. During those 90 minutes between life and death, Don experienced a life-changing journey. Take a look.
In 1989, Don Piper was killed instantly when his Ford Escort was crushed in a head-on collision. After paramedics declared him dead, Don came back to life. In his book, People I Met at the Gates of Heaven, Don reveals the loved ones who greeted him at the pearly gates and the role we play in populating heaven.
Don Piper joins us now. I imagine people never get tired of hearing you talk about what you experienced in those 90 minutes. I mean, lots of people, Don, have near-death experiences, and sometimes their stories, you know, are similar, sometimes not. But you were actually clinically declared dead for 90 minutes before you were resuscitated. What happened?
4 paramedics came. There were 4 vehicles involved in this horrific accident. And so they dispatched 4 ambulances, and they were working on the victims. Nobody else was hurt but me. So that meant that 4 paramedics were working on me, which is very unusual. But they did everything they could, and they were not successful. So I was pronounced dead on the scene by the 4 paramedics. And since the windows were all knocked out of the car and it was roof peeled back, I was exposed. And it was really quite awful looking.
Gruesome,
So they covered me up with a tarp, the body, and they waited for the coroner to come. Preacher came up on the accident and saw this and asked if he could pray for the victims. Well, I was the only victim, and he was told there's no one to pray for. This man is dead. He said, well, God has told me to pray for him. They said, well, go right ahead if you feel like it. And he says, I want to get in the car. Well, you can't do that. If you get in the car, you could be hurt. There's all this twisted metal, broken glass. But he did. He got in that car, and he got behind me, which is the only way he could get in the car, and he put his hand on my right shoulder under the tarp that I was covered up with, and he prayed for an hour and a half.
Good grief.
At the end of that hour and a half, people were praying everywhere for me, but they didn't know I was a fatality. They'd just been called. He's praying, holding onto my shoulder, and he sings, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and I start singing it with him.
Wow.
Well, he was shocked and got out of the car and said to the policeman, Officer, the dead man is singing. And nobody believed him. He finally threatened that if they didn't come and check on me, he was going to lie down in front of the ambulance, not let them leave without me. So they came to check on me and found out I was alive, not very. And they had to get me out of that car. And that began the rest of my life here on earth, was the recovery and finding a new normal, because I was never going to be the same again.
You know, one of the things God impressed upon this pastor who prayed for you was to pray that you wouldn't have any internal injuries or brain damage. And though you didn't have either of those things, your body was so badly mangled.
Yeah, it was. I lost 4.5 inches of my left femur, was ejected from the car and never found. My left arm was severed right in the middle of the forearm, and the arm was dislocated at the shoulder, went over my head into the back seat, and from here forward was lying on the back seat of the car. My right leg was crushed because the dashboard collapsed on it, so I had catastrophic injuries that many people would never recover from. I ended up getting double pneumonia in a very short period of time. and they had to decide whether to remove everything that was left so they could elevate me, get breathing treatments, or try a new experimental treatment that had never been done in the country called external fixators. And they're the large bone-stretching devices you've probably seen in people's necks or on their ankle. They're halos, and the wires go through you and come out the other side. So I wore one of those on my femur, the first one ever, for over a year, and I wore one on my left arm for about 8 months. And they turn screws on these 4 times a day to try to stretch the bones to replace the one that is missing. So I wore that for a year. It was a
30-plus surgeries, so many things to overcome in coming back. Let's go for a moment first to the glory of what you saw when you left here. We'll come back to the pain and the rehab, but you came to heaven immediately.
Immediately. I didn't go down a tunnel. There wasn't a bright light. I don't discount that. I think that happens to some people who are passing away. I was killed instantly. I just took my last breath on the bridge and immediately took my next breath at the gates of heaven. There are 12 gates in heaven, of course, and I was at one of them that looks like the inside of an oyster.
And you were met by all of these people who had had impact on your life spiritually.
It did.
On this side. Were you surprised by that?
I guess I was surprised to be greeted by people immediately, and I was surprised by a couple of the faces of the people that were there. People often ask me, did you see anybody there that you didn't expect to see? And the answer is yes. Not because they had lived, bad lives here. It's just because I was not really that aware of the impact that they had on my life spiritually. Yeah. But lying in a hospital bed for a year and a half, you have a lot of time to think about that. Yeah. And so I remembered those faces, very few I've ever discussed before this book, and what impact they had on my life. And I knew that they had helped me get there. Yeah. I knew that they were the people who took me to church when I didn't have a way to go. They're the ones who talked to me about Jesus. They're the ones who gave me my first Bible. They were the ones who lived a spiritual life in front of me so I know what one was. And they greeted me at the gates of heaven. It was like they helped me get there and they were there to receive me when I arrived.
I love what you said in the book. They were expecting you.
They were expecting me. You don't sneak up on heaven. Yeah. Everybody there knows who's coming. And they certainly knew I was coming that day because they were outside the gates to greet me and welcome me. When I saw their faces, I knew where I was. Yeah,
and they were all well. I think that's such a comfort to so many people who might have lost loved ones in unbearable, unpleasant circumstances. Absolutely. To know that when you saw these people, they were whole in every way.
Unblemished, unscarred. I often say my great-grandmother had no teeth. But when I saw her in heaven, she smiled at me. And it was the first time I ever saw her real smile in my life. And she looked beautiful.
And was it your grandfather who was missing fingers?
He was missing fingers on both hands.
Wow.
He was a carpenter by trade, and over his lifetime, he had some injuries. So he's missing 3 fingers on one hand and 2 on the other. When he reached his hands out to me, and I looked at them, because he held me when I was a little boy, and I was fascinated by those stubs. I looked down, and all of his fingers were there. Wow. And I'd never seen them before. And he said, "Welcome home, Donnie." And I was home. That is my home. This is not my home.
Being greeted by people who had been so instrumental in both large and small ways in your spiritual walk had to be the catalyst for this book. Your first one was about your death experience, but this is people I met at the gates of heaven. Right. Tell me about the why behind this book.
Well, I was greeted by 3 teenagers when I was 15 years old, the summer before my, junior year. They came to my house for visiting for the church. And I got my driver's license, so even though nobody else in my family went to church at that time, I told them, yes, I'll come to your church. Will you be there? And they said, yes, we'll greet you at the door. They did. One of those people greeted me at the gates of heaven because she died of diabetes. Yeah. Another one of the kids that was in that Bible study class who was killed at 18 right after we graduated from high school, Mike Wood, was standing at the gates of heaven when I arrived because he had an influence on my life as well. So they greeted me at the gates because they helped me get there. So I talk about a lot of people like that, which I've never talked about these people before. And I didn't struggle. I just had to decide whether I was going to disclose something that was very personal and intimate. But I wanted people to know that people really influenced me for Jesus. They really had these impacts on me, and I think that's exactly what we're here for, is to help
Amen.
everyone else get there.
So that's the invitation, folks, both to heaven and to be an influence. The book is called People I Met at the Gates of Heaven. Who's going to be there because of you? Well, it's available wherever books are sold. It's a fascinating recount of all that's gone on in Don's life. And we thank you so much for sharing it. May we all be motivated.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
see you at the
you.
gates.
Okay, it's a deal. I'll meet you there. Gordon?
Coming up, a meth cooking, drug dealing addict.
My main focus was making money, sleeping with girls, and staying high. When I died, I turned to dust, so why did anything that I do matter today anyway?
See how this man gets an answer to his question that he never expected. David Stoker had already spent 2 years in prison when he started cooking and distributing meth. He was also using for 2 decades. David saw no way out of his escalating addiction until a song on the radio spoke to his heart.
You know, I got to the point I hated myself. I looked in a mirror, I saw a junkie, I saw a convict, I didn't see a good guy. I saw nothing redeemable about me. And if I don't see anything redeemable about me, then, you know, where do you go from there?
David Stoker held a deep and confusing secret from his parents since early childhood, that he'd been molested by his babysitter.
I remember them reading a paper about a kid that had been molested and talking about how that person was nasty and disgusting, and I thought that they were talking about the kid, not the perpetrator. So I put 2 and 2 together, and I was this disgusting, nasty kid.
He held his secret close and felt he deserved the pain of his parents' later divorce and beatings from his grandfather, who he moved in with.
He would beat me and then call into school and say, hey, he's not going to come into school this week, he's going to help me on the farm, and wait for the bruises to heal up before he'd let me go back to school. That was kind of my punishment for being this disgusting, nasty kid, so I internalized it even more.
The mental effects of the abuse made it hard to relate with other kids. David was often alone. One night while out walking, he met a group of kids and joined them as they smoked a joint.
Probably the second or third time that the joint went around was the first time that I can say I ever felt like I fit in. And it numbed me. I wasn't thinking about my past. The next night I walked to the square, I met the same group of kids, and we drank. If I drank enough or smoked enough, then I couldn't feel the pain, and I realized over time that if I stayed numb, not only did I not think about my past, but nobody could hurt me now.
In high school, David's drug use escalated from marijuana and alcohol to methamphetamine.
I ended up dropping out of high school because school got in the way of my partying time. And as my substance use progressed, I ended up breaking into sheds and garages and stealing stuff and pawning it, and ended up getting sentenced to prison at 20.
After serving a near 2-year prison sentence, he learned how to cook and distribute meth. Still using, David's life slid farther into darkness.
I got to a point I didn't care about my life. I didn't care about anybody else's. I didn't care if I hurt you. My main focus was making money, sleeping with girls, and staying high. That's all I really cared about. It was all about my pleasure, and if I hurt somebody, I could really care less. When I died, I turned to dust, so why did anything that I do matter today anyway?
David spent nearly 2 decades addicted to meth. He was an atheist and suicidal.
I never saw myself escaping. You know, I felt hopeless all the time. I was depressed all the time. My entire life, I felt like everything that had been done to me and everything I'd done, I walked around with that on my shoulders. And it gets really heavy after a while. You're not in a drug world for as long as I am without doing negative things.
He tried to quit meth and began drinking heavily. Then he met a couple who invited him to church. After several weeks, he joined them.
I like to make fun of Christians and try to make myself feel intellectually superior, you know, and that's kind of the person I was. And these people kind of hung on me anyway. And they loved me when I didn't love myself. And they cared about me when I didn't care about myself.
He continued going to church but felt powerless to stop drinking. Then one day, while on his way to a party where he planned on getting drunk, he heard a Christian song on the radio that spoke to him.
The first The words out of the speaker were, "I wish you could see me now. I wish I could show you how I'm not who I was." And when those words came out, I heard a voice I'd never heard before. And it said, "Go home, you got this." And I thought about it, and I pulled over the side of the road, and I sat there and cried for probably 5-10 minutes. And when I could see again, I turned around and I went home.
Desperate for change, he set up a meeting with James, a pastor at the church.
I've tried everything else. At this time, I've been to treatment more times than I can count on one hand. I've taken medication, I've seen psychiatrists, psychologists, and he's like, "Do you believe that Jesus died for your sins?" And that thought of not having to walk around with all of my transgressions, with not having to continue to beat myself up for all the things people had done to me. I mean, it reduced me to tears when I was talking to James.
David surrendered his life to Jesus that day. He says everything changed.
And I felt like a weight had been lifted. All those things that I had on my shoulders that whole time, I mean, it just kind of felt like they disappeared. And it was nice to actually have hope that there was more than just this life. And that hope gave me a whole new outlook.
He was immediately set free from drugs, alcohol, and a broken view of himself.
Christ took all of that from me. That whole, I like the words tabula rasa. It means blank slate. And I like the fact that I thought that my life had already been written, and now I have a clean slate to start over with.
He went back to school and earned a master's degree in social work. He is now a therapist, extending hope to those trapped in addiction. The wounds of his past have healed as he found his identity in Christ.
He's allowed me to see myself as something other than a convict and a junkie. I'm made in God's image. I'm able to look at myself and not see just a piece of junk, which is what I've always saw my whole life. I'm able to wake up in the morning with a smile on my face, and I'm able to be proud of the person I am today, and I'm able to give hope to other people. And without Christ in my life, none of that happens.
And he can give you the same thing. He can give you a blank slate, a start, a restart of your life. Here's the good news. The good news is God has created things for you to walk into, good works for you to accomplish, all because he loves you. He created you for them. He created you for a relationship with him. He wants to give you a hope and a purpose, and he wants to satisfy the desires of your heart. He does all of these things for us. Now, we mess it up, and we go our own way, and we start saying, well, I've got life under control. I can figure this out. I want to do what I want to do. But at the end of all of that, you realize none of that satisfies. It never fills up the God-shaped hole that's within your heart. Because we were made for him, when we don't have him in our lives, we try to fill up that eternity with all kinds of other things. And whether that's drugs, which is David's case, or some kind of sexual escapade. For some, it's money, it's fame, it's power, it's position. But you realize, no, it doesn't really work, and it doesn't really satisfy. The only thing that satisfies is knowing him. And when you know him, then everything else falls into place. It's the piece of the jigsaw puzzle you've been missing your whole life. And here's part of what he wants to do. He'll not only give you the blank slate, he'll say, you're mine. You're made in my image. You're my child now. And with that comes all kind of dignity and self-worth, because you are worth what he paid for you. And that price was really high. He paid with his own life. If you want this, if you want to know he's real, maybe you don't even know he's real, there's a very simple prayer for you. Jesus, if you're there, if you really can forgive me, if you really can set me free, could you show me? Could you show up for me? And if you pray that, with all of your heart. That's the key. You're not trying to trick God. You're not trying to just, slough it off. You really mean it, and you really mean business with him. Well, then the Bible says, when you seek me with all of your heart, then you'll find me. For David, it started with a voice in his car. With you, let it start with that same voice. He'll meet you wherever you are. All you have to do is, Jesus, if you're real, could you show up for me? Could you be my Savior? If you need help with this prayer, we're here for you. All you have to do is call us, 1-800-700-7000. Here's a verse from 2 Corinthians. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become new. For Terry, for me, for all of us here, God bless you, and we'll see you again.